Hey guys, Joseph Baba Ifa here this evening, coming at you with a new video. First and foremost, I want to go ahead and wish everybody a happy Father's Day. I know I had a very blessed one with me and my family, so I'm hoping everybody had a good one as well. Today we're coming out with a new video about spirit pots, right? So on the YouTube channel, we get a bunch of questions on a daily basis, and one of the questions we got was actually based off of another video that we made, where I actually mentioned spirit pots and the different forms that they come in and the different reasons to be able to get them, right? So definitely a topic that a lot of people are interested in, especially by way of receiving it through your sign of Hand of Ifa. Good evening, Miss Envy. Which was actually the basis of the question. And the person actually asked what was the benefit of receiving a spirit pot in general, as well as a spirit pot for their sign of Hand of Ifa, and what are the benefits that come from that. So we're gonna go ahead and touch on both aspects this evening, but this is actually very interesting topic, especially for people who don't have Orisha crowned or are just beginning. It definitely provides them a little bit more of an implement or a tool to be able to basically work with and grow their spirituality, right? So we're gonna go ahead and delve into it. See, we got about 10 people watching right now, and once again, everybody, want to go ahead and start off by saying the YouTube channel is doing very well. If you haven't had the chance to subscribe, please do. And here we go. So whenever I make my videos, the first thing I like to really touch on is the different points that one concept can represent within, the various parts of Africa, right? So when we're talking about the spirit pot, right, it really is a concept that is seen throughout Africa. And the real concept that it represents is going to be the grave, right? When we're talking about having a reciprocal, like a receptacle that basically houses spirituality, it really is nothing more than a portal to go from this world to the next, right? So the first thing it really represents is the grave. And why do we say that? Well, when we look across African cultures, you really see that their burial ceremonies and practices are very different from ours, right? So the first thing we're going to notice is that in the majority of African cultures, family members are actually buried on the compound or in the area where they actually live, right? As opposed to in the Western world, we have areas that are basically designated for that. So it's a very different culture in that aspect, where you can literally go out to your backyard and you'll literally be like, well, there is where my family member is buried, right? So it's very different in that aspect. So when we're talking about African culture, when they're going to attend to the spirits or the ancestors or whatever it is that they're going to do, it's very accessible for them. Obviously with a lot of our ritual rites and whatnot, we have to go through a lot of checks and balances in the new world to be able to attend to them that way, as opposed to in Africa, where the majority of the time you can go to your backyard and attend to the spirit directly, right? So if we're looking at that concept in Africa, it is actually the grave. But what happened in the New World was we needed to find a way to be able to bring that spirituality from basically the cemetery or wherever our ancestors were laid to rest to our home, right? Or to where it was accessible to us, like immediately, whether it be our garage or backyard or whatnot. But we had to do it in a way that was much more subtle, right? So this is where the concept comes from for the pot, right? And one of the functions that it actually serves is the grave. So really, when we're attending to our spirit pots or whatnot, there can be a couple different things going on. But specifically from the spirit pot, it could be that there is a spirituality that identifies with that type of pot or receptacle that we're going to be attending to there, right? So that's the first concept we're going to delve into, because the spirit pot actually touches on a couple different aspects as to what it actually represents. So the first ones that we're going to delve into, as far as like tendencies, is going to be with the Congo religion, or Palo or Mayombe and things like that, and what it actually represents to them. It's no secret that the practitioners of Mayombe have an icon that is basically centered around a pot, right? So what we want to really identify is, where does this all come from? And when we're talking about, and we're definitely going to get to the point of how does this all relate to the Odu of Ifa and the pots that can be mounted through the Odu of Ifa as well. This concept of the pot isn't necessarily only that of Balos, right? It's highly associated with Balos because it is their central icon, right? And when we're talking about the spirit pot within Palo, or the pot that is basically the basis of that faith, it's known as Ganga, right? And to really understand that, we kind of have to look at where the word Ganga comes from. And there's actually a really beautiful story that I was introduced to years ago by a couple of my friends that are actually Dadas and Yayas, etc. And the story basically speaks of the founding of the religion of Palo and Mayombe, and one of the bases of where the spirit pot concept comes from within Africa. So Ganga was actually a man. From what I understand, he was actually a person, right? The same way Orumila was, even though we're talking about completely different religions. Ganga, from what I understand, was an actual man, right? And he was a spiritual icon within his community, within the Bantu people and the people from Angola and the people within the jungle of Mayombe. He was very well known as a spiritual icon, right? And what ended up happening is he led this really amazing spiritual life. He reached great levels of elevation, etc., and he helped a lot of people in the process. But, you know, like all of us, we ultimately have to transition and return to the earth, right, or the grave. And what ended up happening is when Ganga was at the point of basically transitioning, he basically told his followers how he wanted to be remembered and attended to moving forward, right? So what ended up happening is he said, basically, I want you guys to bury me in said spot. And from this point forward, I want you guys to go ahead and attend to me at this same spot. You know, touching on the point that we touched on originally, where, you know, people were buried in the backyard in Africa. So you could actually have your ancestor shrine immediately there. So they ended up doing this. And once they actually buried the gentleman, it became known as a Ganga, right? The actual icon. Where even if you look at some of the Mayombe-based faiths or Bantu-based faiths, the actual priest or the Tata is referred to as a Ganga himself, kind of re-embodying the concept of what this man was and what the priesthood actually represented. So where does this story really incorporate itself in the theme I'm trying to relay here is that, once again, it represents the grave. It represents this icon where we're going to be able to attend to our spiritualities at, whether they be ancestral or whether they be kind of like our spiritual ancestry or a part of our spiritual court. You may have a spirit that practiced this faith that may want you to create an icon like that or receive an icon like that that really helps them identify in you to be able to channel them better. And whenever we channel our spirits more, they're definitely going to help us more to be able to move forward. Because when we're getting involved in any of the African faiths, it's literally to help us progress, right? Whether it's getting scratched, whether it's doing Ifa, whether it's crowning Orisha, all we're doing is channeling our ancestral selves to be able to live in harmony with this current incarnation that we're actually living. So based on that information, and we look at that concept right there, there's a very big difference and between the way things necessarily were practiced beforehand and the innovations that were added in Cuba to be able to make things practical, right? But nonetheless, the purpose still serves the same purpose, or the concept still serves the same purpose, because it's still garnering the same result, right? We were able to progress with it and able to utilize it. So it definitely helps us appease our ancestors and align ourselves with them to help us progress. And if we're going to touch on how that really flows into us receiving a spirit pot by way of our Odu of Ifa, when we're talking about our sign of Ifa in itself is a spirituality or an energy, right? So, you know, as opposed to when someone has a spirit that is, you know, of Mayombe or Congo origin, and we want to identify more with that spirit, we also want to identify more with our actual Odu or sign of Ifa, right? When we look at the Ifa corpus, you're going to notice that there are various signs that actually have specific, you know, recipients or receptacles that are that can be composed to be able to help you identify not only with your sign of Ifa, but the spiritualities that are associated with it, or the ones that actually came with you. And this is why I say that the concept of the pot isn't necessarily only that of, Congo and Mayombe origin. If we look at Yoruba culture, if we look at Arara culture, and we look at all these different tribes, all of them actually have this concept, which goes back to their concept of the grave, right? So it makes a lot of sense why there would be one in Ifa. So when we're talking about associating ourselves with our Odu of Ifa, it's speaking about the spiritualities, it's speaking about the sign itself. And then there's a whole nother concept about us being able to identify with our past self. Because if we're talking about within our sign of Ifa, we are nothing more than a reincarnation of that same sign. The same spiritualities that are associated with us could be spiritualities that had that same sign or Odu, as well as us in past lives. So it's nothing more than helping us channel our ancestral self once again to be able to live in harmony with this current incarnation that we're actually living. So it's pretty deep stuff. I mean, the idea that there are methods for us to be able to centralize ourselves spiritually here on earth, it's very important for us to make sure that we do those things. So that's directly touching on the answer of the question that the person was really looking at, is what benefits come from me doing this? Because at the end of the day, whenever we take a spiritual action or a religious action, there has to be some benefit, not only to the spiritualities, but to us here on earth. Because, everything takes a certain level of sacrifice to be able to make it happen. So that's one of the things that's going to help you do. It's going to help you channel your spiritualities. It's going to help you channel, your Odu of Ifa more. And it's going to help you live in harmony with, what you're living here on earth, which is basically what we're all trying to do by practicing any of these things. So super key there. If you notice, I mean, within also speaking about the concept of the Odu of Ifa within the spirit pot and how that's, all connected, not everybody is necessarily meant to have one. You're going to have some people that have the criteria that, everybody has to have an icon like this, but not necessarily everybody has a link with a spirituality so strong to the point where you have to confection something like this. This really is something that has to be very well investigated, because within spirituality, especially from the African standpoint, you don't want anything extra. You only want things that are basically going to help you move forward. Because if they're helping you move forward, it's because they're spiritual debts that you have here on earth that you have to fulfill to be able to better your life and move forward and accomplish things, right? And align yourself more with your destiny. So, how can we come to determine whether we need a spirit pot in general? It can come from sitting in multiple spiritual masses, and them identifying, hey, you have a spirituality that really would like you to create this icon to identify more with them. Or it can be that you actually got initiated in a religion where it's a central icon like Mayombe, or through your Odu of Ifa, by looking at it and studying it and actually finding, because literally within various signs, it's going to be like, hey, this needs to be confectioned to be able to align yourself with these said things. These are ways to really know whether you need one or not. It's definitely not something you just want to have just to have. It's definitely not a toy. And when we're talking about more benefits from that, when we do things from our sign of Ifa, such as a spirit pot or whatever else, or just in general, whenever we're initiating into a tradition that we were meant to initiate into, benefits come from that. Because anything that we do here on earth is nothing more than a debt that we basically were imposed on heaven, or that we chose ourselves. So before coming down from heaven, the African spiritualities say that, we promise to do certain things to be able to achieve certain things, right? So let's say someone was like, I'd really like to be a doctor on earth. Well, Olodumare or Sambia or whatever name you're giving to your higher entity, is basically going to say, hey, to be able to achieve that, you need to do this, this, and this. And one of those things may be a spirit pot in itself, right? You need to confection this icon, sacrifice it the things that it's actually asking for. And once you do that, you're going to be able to accomplish your goals much easier. So it's kind of like unlocking things within your spiritual path. That's why if you notice, And it's not a secret that when you're walking this spiritual path, there's always something to do. It never ends, because the day it ends, it means that we're no longer here and we're in another plane of existence. So the spirit pot can be just one more of those steps that is going to allow you to move forward and allow you to accomplish different things, because you're going to be more in harmony with your own spirituality. When we're talking about Odus of Ifa, we definitely want to try to accomplish everything that Odu speaks of. And the reason being is because every ebo, or every action, or every offering, these are all spiritual debts that we came with. And what we need to try to accomplish while we're still alive is as many of these things as possible for one of two outcomes. Either to not have to come back in the next life, to achieve a level of spirituality and spiritual elevation where we don't have to reincarnate as living humans to be able to evolve. Or it could be that, it's just for you to be able to come back in a better state of being, right? So the various ebos or the spirit pot or any of these things are going to help really, help that move forward. So it's very important that diligently, not over, exerting ourselves trying to get everything done. It's not that we need to be in a rush to do it, but we need to stay, motivated and doing things little by little from our sign of Ifa or spiritual debts within our spirituality, so that we can progress in life and, Lord willing, not have to come back, or if we do have to come back in a much, pleasant experience, right? So that's really what the goal of all of it is, besides the spiritual alignment aspect of it. So we touched on the Mayombe aspect of things, and obviously it's a very central concept there. But the Yoruba people definitely have this concept within their practice as well. Being that it is within Odu of Ifa, it has to be within Yoruba culture, right? And when we're looking at what the word pot is in Yoruba, it's actually the word ikoko, right? The word ikoko basically refers to a pot, whether it be of clay, whether it be Boruboya Damian, Obuato, whether it be of clay, whether it be of metal, it can be of a bunch of different, materials. Probably, in my opinion, the most antiquated one or the oldest one is going to be the clay. Because if we're looking at, the dirt in Africa, from what I understand, it's very reddish and clayish in texture and material. So that's where the first things were confectioned out of, clay and things like that. That's why, it's so prominent within our practice. So being that you're going to see a lot of those, and within Yoruba culture it's present, that's why there's even a word for it, and the word for it is ikoko. So what does it necessarily represent? Being that they're made out of clay and the dirt is very clay-like and red-like, it once again is referring back to the concept of the grave, right? Because it's a way to be able to take this concept of the burial ground and put it in an accessible spot for us to be able to practice. And this is very present within Yoruba culture as well, being that they're well known for their clay work, and besides that, their bronze work as well. They were some of the innovators with that, but these are all items and materials that were used to confection these kind of icons, right? So, just to give an example of an Odu or an actual sign that speaks of it, because there's various ones. I would say every other sign of Ifa has one, and if you're interested in this, you definitely want to get in contact with your elders, your Ifa elders, or your spiritual elders in general, so they can point you in the direction, especially if you have a calling for it. More than likely your Odu does speak of it. But there actually is an Odu of Ifa known as Oshebara, where it actually speaks of a gentleman who was initiated or had an icon like this. And he was a very spiritual human being, but it was to the point where, unfortunately, his family members would pass away and he would put them in a receptacle, and he would pray to them. So once again, reiterating the concept of the grave, it was an icon, it was a form of ancestor worship. And you see this across multiple tribes in Africa. It was a way to be able to centralize that energy and have it organized to the point where it's like, we need to speak to our ancestors, we go to said spot, right? So that's actually in the Odu Oshebara, where the gentleman would basically, unfortunately, have to bury his family, and he would put it in like a central grave or tomb, where he would be able to attend to all of them. So, for example, that's just one of the many signs that speaks of it. But somebody with this Odu would definitely be, ideal that they looked into this opportunity or possibility, right? And it is another form of worshiping Egun rather than just receiving Isage Ngungun, right? Which is the icon of the Orisha that represents all of the spirits ever, whether it be your spirit guides or whether it be your ancestors. Isange Gungun is the central icon, but when we're talking about the pot and being able to prepare it spiritually and the concept of it, it's basically an add-on of that, group or cult or practice. A little less formal, but not any less legitimate from a cultural standpoint. You see this basically across Yoruba culture, so it's definitely present, and it was way present before the religion ever arrived in Cuba, right? So now that we've gone over the grave concept of what the pot really represents, the next aspect of what the pot represents, being that it is a spirit pot, it has a lot to do with the dead and our ancestors and whatnot. But the other concept is that of nature, right? When we're looking at any of these things, not to delve too much into what goes into any of these pots, but there's a lot of elements of nature within them. So the concept behind that is us, once again, trying to be able to bring the world or things to us in a convenient aspect to be able to practice spiritually without having to go out. So the concept of the pot as well is to bring nature to one's feet, right? Or to be able to have all of these elements that go in along with the spiritualities that live within it at one's disposal to be able to practice, right? So it's basically a way of bringing our ancestors as well as nature to our doorstep, basically, to be able to practice at a moment's notice or to make it convenient, right? And this is where the concept of being able to influence nature with these things really comes from, because if I'm able to incorporate all of the different positions of nature or spirituality within one icon, it's a very powerful thing to be able to interact with that, work with that, all those different energies at a moment's notice, and it can be very powerful. So it takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of humility, it takes a lot of preparation to be able to use these things constructively and, for them to actually be a benefit. Because in the hands of the wrong person or somebody that's not prepared, it can be it can be something negative. So definitely it's not something you want to rush. It's definitely something that you want to speak about with your elders beforehand and make sure they prepare you before you start, interacting with it independently. So, and once again, items like this that are in line with who we are personally, because when we're talking about spirit pots, nobody's spirit pot is going to be the exact same. You guys might each have a sarabanda, and there's still going to be little nuances that are going to be different because every human being is different, and the way that spirituality interacts with you is going to be different. The same way when we take it to Ifa, and everybody's Odu of Ifa is different. Or even people who have the same Odu or sign of Ifa aren't exactly the same person, even if they have the same guardian Orisha. So it's a very personalized process. It should never be exactly like somebody else's. It should be something that should have a basic framework, or it should have like a template, like, hey, these are the basic items that go into it. But other than that, it could really take on a character of its own. So that always has to be present. No one's is ever going to be exactly the same. No one's is prepared the same way. And as with all things in African faiths and spiritualities, you're going to go to different parts of Africa and everybody's going to be able to or do it in a different way, which makes a lot of sense, because if you see the Bantus have a specific way of confectioning it, the Yorubas have a different way of confectioning it. I'm sure the Hausa and the Igbo and all of these different tribes, they have this icon or this symbolism, but they all do it in a different way. It has a different manifestation, usually based on culture, right? So speaking of that, but once again, it's a way to align yourself with nature. When we have all of these different implements in one space, by us interacting with it, by us appeasing it, by us, doing what we need to be able to be in harmony with it, at the same time, we're actually becoming in harmony with nature. And when we do things like this, life tends to go a little better. And it may sound a little cliche, but when we move with the universe, things tend to progress in a much better way. And these spirit pots or these orishas or anything that you're interacting with, it's simply a method for you to be able to interact better with nature and the universe, which is what everybody wants, because once again, things go from a much more positive standpoint when we do that, And if we're going back to the idea of doing this through Ifa, By us aligning ourselves more with our Odu, we're aligning ourselves more with our Ori, right? Or our internal destiny. And when we do this, we progress at a much more rapid rate. And the reason being is not because we're doing anything out of the ordinary, we're simply living in line with our destiny. So every time we receive a deity that's associated with our sign, or we do something like a spirit pot that's associated with our Odu, things will advance because you're harmonizing yourself more with your spiritual DNA, which is basically what a sign or an Odu of Ifa is. And that's why Orumila really is the first thing that comes into the religious person's life, because through it, we really know who we are, right? Our Odu of Ifa is who we are. It's much more than just a conversation. It's our spiritual DNA. If you ever look at an Odu of Ifa, it literally resembles a double helix, right? The Odu of Ifa literally resembles the double helix that basically what a DNA structure is, and that's not by chance. That was constructed that way because it literally it represents our spiritual, physical, human body in all of its aspects, right? So very important, if your Odu does speak of these things, to little by little work towards the icons and the deities that are involved so that you can harmonize yourself more with your Odu of Ifa, right? And like we said, ideally everything in your Odu, within your capacity, you want to be able to accomplish while here on earth. Are you going to be able to? More than likely not, because when we're talking about an Odu of Ifa, we're talking about hundreds of existences, realities, all of these different things. But the things you do accomplish here on earth is what you were meant to accomplish. So let's say you're an Odu that's very ample, like let's say Obe Odura, right? 300, 400 patakis between the traditional and Creole practice. Maybe you'll get 100 of those at Bo's done while on earth, or you'll be able to do 100 of the different things that sign speaks of, and that's pretty impressive in itself. But being that you were motivated and you did those things, maybe that was what your spiritual debt was in this existence, and maybe by getting that done, you might not have to come back again. And one of those debts may be the spirit pot as well. So to kind of recapitulate and kind of go around again, when we're talking about the benefits of receiving our spirit pot by way of our hand of Ifa Odu, the benefits are multiple, right? We're harmonizing ourselves with our ancestors. We're harmonizing ourselves with nature by the nature of this icon, with all the things that may be incorporated in it. We're harmonizing ourselves with our spiritual DNA, which is our Odu of Ifa. And by doing all of these things, life just goes better. It's somewhat inexplicable, but it's not to say that life is a free ride at that point. But, you do notice that when you align yourself with who you are, and you begin to fulfill what it is that you said you were going to fulfill before coming down from heaven, you tend to live a better life, because ideally, Olodumare has a beautiful plan for each and every one of us. And all he asks is that we fulfill our divine promises to him, and then we're going to live the life that we were meant to. And if we were meant to live it, it's because it's positive, because Olodumare only provides positive existences for his children, right? And that's why he put us into existence in the first place. So that's basically the benefits of it and why you would do it. Besides vocation and a calling, if your Odu of Ifa recommends it, or if your spiritualities recommend it, of course it's recommended. And usually if you're feeling this, it's because this is one of the things you were meant to do while here on earth, right? As far as attending to these things, they can be very different. This is going to be a little bit of a generic conversation, because everybody's spirit pot is different. Everybody, how they're going to interact with it is going to be very different. So it really comes down to understanding your Odu of Ifa and seeing what it says about it. There may be a pataki that's associated with it, or through spiritual masses, right? Through investigation masses and things like that. Or, if you practice something like Mayombe or something like that, and if it's a little bit more formal, they may have a specific process there. So it really depends on the tradition you're involved in, and really getting with your elders so they can help you take this step. But the beautiful thing about this step is, if it's like within an Ifa practice and you're not a Babalawo, you can receive this while you have hand of Ifa. Now your interactions may be limited, but it's still going to allow you, much more autonomy before being able to actually get consecrated or enter into the priesthood. So it's nice to have it because it gives you a little bit more independence. You can interact with it more. You might be able to communicate with it. Any of these different things. So it's not a bad thing to have before or after, getting initiated. So that's pretty much Spirit Pots, guys. Once again, I really hope everybody had a wonderful Father's Day. I was very blessed. I got some wonderful gifts from my kids, and I hope everybody's healthy with all the various things that are going on in the world right now. More than happy to open up the conversation, the questions, if anybody has any follow-up questions about the things we've touched on. But really great video, really great question. The YouTube channel just reached 500 subscribers, so we're very happy about that people are responding well. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch and things like that. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to leave questions, comments, anything you guys want. I'm actually in my patio tonight, so if you hear nature, it's because I'm being one with nature right now, right? So if there's any questions or anything like that, we'll keep it open for a little bit. But Spirit Pots are a wonderful thing. It's usually one of the first steps you're going to take within any of these religions, and the benefits are always going to be nice because when we're in line with all these things just go better. Even if it just is a specific spirit or muerto that you have, and this is what they're asking for, that it's just going to go better. Heather, is there a specific lineage tied to the different elements? I can't say that because it's ironic because a lot of the elements, regardless of the different traditions you're going through, they're kind of the same, right? They're elements of nature, some of the most basic elements of nature, right? You're going to have some things from the mineral kingdom. You're going to have some things from the animal kingdom. You're going to have some things from the vegetable or the vegetative, like fauna kingdom, right? So it's going to incorporate various aspects of nature. And to get a definitive list, you definitely want to get with your elders, right? Like you did. But through that, you're really going to be able to confection something that's well-rounded and is actually, productive and is actually going to provide results. With things like this, people can philosophize a lot about it or they can discuss a lot about it, but it has to work. So we have to make sure, the basic ingredients are in there. But is there a set, thing or definitive list? No. But ironically, from culture to culture, practice to practice, a lot of the same ingredients are incorporated. Because at the end of the day, even if you're Yoruba, even if you're Bantu, even if you're any of these different tribes, you're African, right? So we're going to have things in common. We're going to eat things that are in common. We're going to interact with, aspects of life that are in common. And ultimately, cultural influences are always going to penetrate religion, regardless of whether it's in Africa or Cuba, and you're going to see those influences there. So that's where you're going to see a lot of, the influences of what goes into these different type of things. So absolutely. So you're going to see a lot of similarities regardless of tradition. So yes. Awesome, guys. Do we have any other questions? Anything else about the Spirit Pots that we wanted to touch on this evening? Definitely get with your elders. Look into the possibility of receiving it. Really delve deep into your Odu. Study as much as you can so you can come to a conclusion. Learn how to take care of it. Learn how to interact with it. Be in harmony with it. Better your religious habits. Do things at a pace to where you're able to handle. Because if you just received Hand of Ifa, and now you have the warriors, and now you have Orumila, you have more responsibilities. So always be aware of that and have that under control from a time standpoint before we incorporate another icon into our repertoire. Because, the more things we have, the more of a responsibility we have, right? So you always want to make sure you're prepared for that before taking on that responsibility. So seems like that's all we got for this evening. Guys, once again, thank you so much. Joseph Baba Ifa YouTube channel is doing wonderfully. Botanica Candles and More is doing wonderfully. I hope everybody's staying safe. Once again, I hope everybody had a wonderful and happy Father's Day. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Big things coming at the Botanica. Be on the lookout for that. And we're going to come out with videos as often as we can, answer as many questions as we can. And even if you didn't get a chance to see this live, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. Our information is out there. And, you know, we're here for you, right? So, sincerely from Joseph Baba Ifa, Botanica Candles and more. You guys have a blessed evening and a happy Father's Day, right? Borui Boye Bochiche. Take care, family.